Welcome to class online. Today we are going to be looking at native son, Richard Wright. Now, in our previous engagement, we looked at two African prose and we said we are going to be looking at a non-African prose in our next class. And let me make an explanation. An African prose is a prose written about the African setting, a novel about the African setting, and written by an African author. But some arguments have had it in the past that what if a foreigner decides to write about the African setting? Can we refer to it as an African prose? Take for example, there's a book written by Joyce Carr. It is titled The Heart of Darkness. Now it's a story about Africa, but it was not written by an African, rather it was written by a European. Now in literary engagements, most people have come to ask is, can that book be referred to as an African work since it was written by a non-African but about the African experience? Now some school of thought have come to say that nobody can explain your story better than you. There's a proverb that says no one can tell you where the rain began to beat you. You are the only one that can explain that to yourself better than anybody. So a book written by a non-African about the African experience cannot be called an African prose because that non-African do not share in that African experience. So for the purpose of our study, we decided to make our listeners understand that African prose is a work of art, a book or a novel written by an African that portrays the African experience as it's seen from the two works we've read before now. But a non-African work is a work written by a European or any other person that is a non-African that talks about world experience or every other experience that is not relative to African alone. And one of such work is a book by the author Richard Wright, known as Native Son. Now this book tries to show us the divide that exists between the black and white. Before now, discrimination has been an international issue. It has been something that has caused pains in various countries in the world. There's been this discrimination between the black and the white, what is popularly referred to as apartheid. Now in Richard Wright's Native Son, the author tries to make a self-consciousness about the question of why blacks are treated the way they are treated. And in real life experience, true to life experience, Richard Wright is a communist. He's a person that believes in a classless society, a society where there is no divide, where there is no rich, there is no poor. He doesn't believe in the capitalist dispensation. He believes that everyone has a right to fair sharing and equal distribution of resources and wealth in a society. But in a society where there is a divide, where there is the black and the white, everyone do not have a right to the shares and distribution of resources and wealth in the society. There happens to be a divide in such society. And when there is a divide in such society, the divide is being determined by the pigments of their skin. And that is what we see in the Native Son. Now, the author tries to bring two environments, an area where the whites live, another area where the black stays. Where the whites live is characterized by rich affluence and wealthy lifestyle. Merely looking at the surroundings, you will know that people living in this particular area are rich people. Now where the black live is made up of what is known as slums, ghettos, lifestyles that you cannot, an environment that you can't describe because it is something that is an eyesore. It's not something that is good to the eye. But the irony of the whole story is that where the whites live is being maintained and beautified by the blacks. The blacks go to work in white environments. They work as laundrymen, cleaners, and what have you for these white people to maintain their environment for them. But back to their black environment, it is nothing to write them about. And they do not have equal rights because the whites do not attend, the blacks do not attend the same schools as the whites. And most blacks are seen as illiterates. They don't even attend school. They don't get the level of education that the whites have attained. Now the author in this book looked at two different people that we're going to call the oppressed and the oppressor. One is the oppressor and the other one is the oppressed. Now without being told, we should know that the oppressed are the blacks. People who are being judged not because of what they have in their brain, not because of their character, not because of their content, but because of the color of their skin. And the oppressor is the white. people who feel that they are next to God. They see themselves as demigods. They lord it over the blacks. Now, the book revolves around a character known as Bigger Thomas. Now, like I've mentioned in different classes before now, we said that literature is a mirror of the society. Literature tries to make a conscious engagement of what the society is and what the society is not. Now, Bigger Thomas stands for every black person that has been discriminated against in the world. He represents the black nation, the black people who have suffered untold hardship from the hands of the oppressor, who is the white. We said we're going to be looking at two persons in this work of art. One is the oppressed, who are naturally the blacks, and the other ones are the oppressor, who are the whites. While I was starting this engagement, I said that there happens to be a class divide between the whites and the black. And it's an irony that the blacks are the ones that go to take care of the wealth and affluence of these white people. They go to take care of their surroundings. They take up menial jobs, all kinds of jobs. Laborers, cleaners, laundrymen, whatever you have, cooks, to make sure that these whites live up to their affluent lifestyle. But back home, into their black environment, most of them lack basic amenities like water, electricity, and good roads. But they work effortlessly for a penny. What they are even paid by the whites is not even enough to take care of their livelihood. Now, one of such persons in the book was Bigger Thomas. He was being employed by a white man as a driver, a chauffeur, to drive his daughter around. Now, something happened, a very sad story. The daughter went for a drink, a night out, and along the line, she came back half dead, unconscious. In the course of this story, we're going to bring out a series of events that led, one, to the daughter going out to drink. Secondly, why she came back half dead. Third, what happened, and how Bigger Thomas saw himself in jail. But before we get down to that, we want our viewers to really understand the concept behind the book Native Son. And like we said times with that number, that every writer has a message he wants to pass across. Now we want to look at the message Richard Wright had in mind before bringing out this particular work of art. It's until we understand the message, that is when we can be able to understand the book in itself. And as literature questions will have it, nobody's going to ask you to write about the plot. Nobody's going to ask you to write about the story. But rather, they will want you to make a conscious effort to bring out the various themes that the writer has looked at in writing his work. And one of such things we said is communism. Communism. Why the writer wrote about communism is because he himself is a die-hard communist. He's someone that believes in a classless society. A society where there is no divide. A society where everybody can live together as one. Where they can have a fair share to the distribution of wealth and resources in the society. That was what Richard Wright believed in. And that was what he tried to portray in his work, The Native Son. And then he also looked at the issue of hypocrisy of justice. There's a saying that the court of law, is the last resort of the common man. But in this book, it is the other way around. The law does not become the last resort of the common man. Rather, the law is the resort for only the oppressor, the whites. The oppressed can't go to the law court and have a fair hearing. Justice system is biased. It is not fair hearing. It is not free and fair. It is not credible for anyone that has a black pigment in his skin. It is only credible for the whites. So it turns out on the other hand to mock the whole philosophy of law that says it is the last resort for the common man. Because the common man in Bigger Thomas society are the blacks who are being oppressed countlessly by the whites. But when Bigger Thomas finds himself in jail for a crime he committed, yes, he actually committed a crime. But like I said earlier, in our various classes, we are going to, because this book is a very long book. It's a very lengthy book. In fact, it is the biggest Richard Wright has ever written. So we are going to take our time to dissect the work and see the different facets of black and white discrimination that Richard Wright touched in the work of art. But there was something Bigger Thomas did that landed him in jail. And when he was to appear before the court of law, he didn't get a fair hearing. Why? Because he was a black. So Richard Wright was trying to mock the justice system. He was trying to mock the justice system in the sense that he felt that the whites had more advantage. They could buy up justice because of the color of their skin. It's not even about money now. It's not even about wealth. It's just about the fact that one is black and the other is white. And when a black man and a white man appears before the law court, the white man seems to have victory because he's white. So Richard Wright exposes the hypocrisy of justice that existed in Bigger Thomas society and that exists in every society where black and whites are not treated as the same. And then also he looked at the principle of racism. The principle of racism and its disastrous effect on the human race. Now, racism is very simple. It's a simple concept for us to understand. It's simply the concept of one race discriminating against another race simply because they feel that their own race or that their own culture is more developed, more exposed than the other culture. Now Richard Wright exposes us to the effects that racism has on us blacks. And one of these effects is that racism builds a kind of syndrome on the blacks. It makes them feel that they are not wanted by the society. It gives them this low self-esteem on themselves, and this exposes them to different kinds of vices such as crime. Now they resort to crime because they feel that they are not wanted by the whites. They can't get good jobs from the whites. They can't have a sense of belonging in the society. So the best thing to do is to hunt these whites, and it makes them into dangerous people. It makes them into criminals, and it's a very bad stereotype because the whites now start to label them as criminals, hooligans, niggers. That is another offensive word used by the blacks, by the whites to label the blacks, niggers. And it's also a word used in the book too. Now, because of the stereotype that we look by these whites, it brings out this bad nature in the blacks, in the sense that they feel that okay, they are helpless, they are oppressed, they don't have anything to do again. It's as an example of a powerful man chasing someone that is less powerful. You've chased the person, you've pushed the person to the wall. On getting to the wall, the person has no option than to turn around and face you. That is the situation between the whites and the black. The whites have pushed the black to the wall. And some of these blacks, not all of them, some of them have resorted to violence as the only way to pay back the whites for what they have done to them. And we'll come to see that Richard Wright did not only write a story that was peculiar to Bigger Thomas society alone. He started by saying that it's a non-African prose. The setting was not in Africa. But then, this particular issue of racism has spread to every nook and cranny of the world where blacks and whites live together. It's even part of our own African experience. In fact, some persons have even gone to jail for a good number of years because they are trying to fight against apartheid. So like we always make us understand in literature that it's a continuous struggle. A continuous struggle in the sense that the writer keeps writing about what is and what is not about his society. Now if it's not left for his audience, his readers who are reading the book, to be able to relate with what the writer is trying to pass across. And in this particular work of art, we now see a story, a narrative that cuts across not just the Bigger Thomas society, but on the world entirely. And then we said that this racism has told badly on the blacks because it has made some of them, it has turned them into what they are not to be. Because they feel that resorting to violence is the only way that they can bring up a bold face to the white. And that is what led our character, Bigger Thomas, to prison. Now, like I said earlier, the work is a good book. We are going to take our time to look at it. And in taking our time to look at it, we have divided it into 4 phases. The first phase is going to look at Bigger Thomas and his family. Now they live in a squalid condition. They live in a despicable condition. Despicable in the sense that he's from a family of 4. Himself, his 2 sisters, his 2 brothers, and his mother. Now they live in a house barely enough to contain one. That is where the four of them squeeze themselves in. The living condition for Brigadier Thomas and his family is poor, very poor. Nothing to write home about. We're going to start from there, considering the background Brigadier Thomas is coming from as a black. Then from there, we're now going to look at the place where he got a job with his white boss. And then what led to him accidentally murdering the daughter of his white boss, whom he was employed to drive around as a chauffeur. Then we're now going to look at his flight. Flight in the sense that there was a time Brigadier Thomas disappeared. They were looking for him. They sent a search party all over. In fact, a bounty, money was placed on his head, that whoever finds him was going to be given an amount of money until he was found. And then we're going to look at his life, his last time in jail, and all about the justice system that hanged him. These are some of the situations we're going to consider in the work. But in the meantime, we're going to take a quick glance at the characters that contributed to the development of this work. And one of them is Mary Dalton. Mary Dalton is an only child of Henry and Henry Dalton. Mary Dalton is the only child of Henry Dalton. Now Henry Dalton is the white man that employed Brigadier Thomas. He's Brigadier Thomas' boss. And Mary Dalton was the girl Brigadier Thomas was supposed to drive around, a white girl. Now she had a boyfriend known as Jane Earl. Jane Earl was a member of the Communist Party. He's a white himself, because in the society, whites have affairs, they keep relationship with whites. But then Jane Earl was someone that believed so much in the communist system, even if he was a white. He was sympathetic of the conditions of the blacks in the society, and he believed so much in communism. And then we're going to look at another character too in the book, which was Buckley. Buckley was a state prosecutor. By the time we come into the section of justice, when Brigadier Thomas was taken to jail, we're not going to see the character Buckley. Buckley had a very huge hatred for anything that is black, anything that represents black. He had a huge hatred for it, and that was why he spearheaded the case of Brigadier Thomas and that of the deceased Mary. Now we're going to look at another character in the book who is known as Peggy. Peggy is an Irish-American housekeeper. She worked for the Daltons, but she was sympathetic of Brigadier Thomas, even if she was a white. She was of low white status. She was not so much of the middle class. She came from the low class society. But then she was a white. But she had a little bit of sympathy in her for the blacks compared to other white society, other white people that lived in her society. She was different from them. She had a little bit of sympathy for the blacks. That's the character Peggy. We're also going to look at Mrs. Dalton. She was Mary Dalton's mother. She was a bit ill in the story. Richard Wright portrayed her as a woman who was not so strong. And then we're also going to see Bessimia. Bessimia was Brigadier Thomas' girlfriend in the book. She's a black. She was also killed. We're also going to look at the situations that led to her death. Now these are the characters that contributed to the development of the plot. But viewers, we want you to understand something. What we want you to understand is that the subject matter of this whole work is racism. Racism is the subject matter of the work. And then the author tries to expose us to the dangers and the effects of racism, both on the oppressor and the oppressed. That is what the work is going to tell us about. But in our next class, I said we're going to look at 4 different areas. The 4 different areas is 1, the early life of Brigadier Thomas, his background. We're going to consider his background, the character's background. We're now going to look at him getting a job with the Daltons. We're also going to look at what led to the death of Mary Dalton. And then, lastly, we're also going to look at the justice system. What really happened to Mary Dalton. So that is all about racism. That is all about native son, and that is all about the principle of being oppressed and the oppressor. So in our next class, we're going to go into the book and see all the stories that led to the ugly experience of Brigadier Thomas a native son. Until then, see you next time.